Hello and welcome to another episode of Partners in Crime 100 and something, Bob.
Good grief, is it really? Well, we say that every week. We can't believe that we are so old, but
I
on this
know.
occasion, of course, I am considerably older. Though
You
younger than
are.
the number of episodes, I'm delighted to say, but I'll be catching up fast at this rate.
Well, do you know what? There's something about birthdays and episodes of Partners in Crime because it's once we were kind of within about 2 or 3 episodes of the 100 mark, we knew exactly how many episodes we were on. And it's a bit like birthdays. If you're, when you're an adult, you don't really know how old you are. You've got to do the maths and work it out. But if your age ends in a 9, you're acutely aware of how old you are, waiting for that next big milestone to roll around within the next year. So I think it's a bit, they are similar in some ways.
Well, there we are. That's a great theory, and I'm going to buy into it absolutely. Well, here we are. I'm sitting in the sun. I'm happy to say, and you obviously have been because you've gone the colour of one of those mahogany tables you occasionally see on Antique Roadshow.
I'm getting on for ebony now, I think.
Unless you've just had a lovely French polish, of course, which I'm sure you have as well.
Well, I've been doing some reading actually, which I'm going to get onto in a bit. So I'll let you carry on with your outdoor adventures. I can see, and anybody who's watching the video on Patreon will be able to see your nicely painted shed behind you.
There it is, in that very popular green, a bit too popular for my liking. But there we are. We fell for it, and actual greenery, I think, and and there's some blue sky through the foliage, and I'll just see up through the garden there. Where it's just
Lovely.
What I've done is I've actually reclaimed the end of our garden because we haven't used it for we just didn't bother to come and sit down here, and it's great because this lockdown it's a bit like being on holiday, and I realise that for those who haven't got a garden, that they will hate my guts saying this, and I'm sure I mentioned it before, but it's been absolutely one of the nicer things of lockdown is I can come down here with my coffee in the morning and pretend I'm on my holes when in actual fact I'm just a few yards from home. So it's a staycation.
We've been quite lucky with the weather, really. Actually, considering the lockdown has been kind of March to May so far, it could have been horrendous.
I think we very quickly figured out that the lockdown does become a lot tougher when the weather's poorer, and you're confined to the house. That's although I tend to get a little bit more work done. I mean, real work, not just fiddling around with hedgerows and mowing the lawn. But it's we are lucky, and I think we've got this for this week. But I was thinking about this yesterday. The weather. The British are obsessed with the weather. That's a well-known, well-documented fact. But the news, it's big news, the weather, for obvious reasons, because we have such extremes of weather worldwide now that everyone has to keep an eye on it. But I have noticed that there's a creeping sense of headlines which pull you into a story online and don't quite deliver the morbid, assuage your morbid curiosity, like sort of hurricane approaching, massive cold snap, 6 feet of snow, and you sort of in the mirror or the sun or whatever, and you press into it, and of course it's they're just saying it's going to hit Nova Scotia in about, and you just go, well, you've caught me. And there's your advertising. So I think it's a little naughty that they use the weather at times to draw you in like other headlines do, It's the sort of thing that Robert Daws wears his bikini by the pool, that sort of thing, which always gets, that's the sort of headline.
That no clickbait there. That's entirely accurate. I'm going to crack on with a little bit of news before we get on to our what we've been reading this week. And I've read kind of 3 or 4 books. It's been quite extraordinary, actually. I managed to get some decent reading in.
You've obviously not been doing any writing.
Well, I have been. I was waiting for some research questions to come back for my new book, which I couldn't go any further until I had those. So I did have a few days where I was just essentially... I basically had a weekend for the first time in ages. In the news, some unfortunate, some very sad news actually, that the godmother of modern Scandinavian crime fiction, Mai Sjöwall, has died at the age of 84. She was a co-author of 10 detective stories featuring the Swedish policeman Martin Beck, which she wrote with Per Vålö. They met in 1962, working as magazine journalists. And yeah, they decided to live together and write books together, and they were phenomenally popular. And yes, unfortunately, she has died on the 29th of April at the age of 84. So some sad news there. But on the plus side, the Times have given us, and this is something we never see any newspaper or magazine or website do, they've given a roundup of what they think are the best crime novels, which I think is a very novel idea, if you pardon the pun.
That you have to actually break down the paywall, don't you?
The paywall has been broken down.
I understand papers are all together struggling, but and I read both the Guardian and the Times to get a sort of a balanced view of the world. Although I know where my particular heart lies, but it is a frustration. I mean, I donate to the Guardian because the Guardian goes about it by just saying, will you help us? Can you give a bit of money? And the Times, of course, has a paywall. So yeah, okay. I mean, there are different theories about this, but so I haven't seen it, is what I'm saying. Although I did get a copy of the Culture magazine this Sunday from the Sunday Times, and I'm going to be reading from that shortly. So it's obviously a Times week. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. It's good to have that extra flavour. The Times have listed what they see as the best crime novels by women this century, and also Murderstone by Louise Penny, Whom He May Devour by Fred Vargas, The Stonecutter by Camilla Lackberg, obviously a Scandinavian writer, and we're going to be touching on more Scandi noir later as well. Fear in the Sunlight by Nicola Upson, they chose, British crime writer. The Black Path by Asa Larson, which is the third book in the Rebecca Martinson series, which you're a particular fan of, I know, Bob.
I like both the books and the series.
Yes. The cleverly named and presumably sequel, The Ides of April by Lindsay Davis. The Silence of the Sea by Ursa Sigurdardottir, who
How do you pronounce that again? Because I'm going to have to pronounce it in a little bit.
Ursa Sigurdardottir is how I pronounce it.
Sigurdardottir. Well, I'll see what I can come up with.
It's one of those Icelandic names, isn't it? If you're a woman, your name normally ends in Dottir because you're the daughter of, in this case, Sigurda. Or if you're a son, you end in son. There we go.
Yes, Johan Son.
Yes. Falling in Love.
Icelandic from our producer.
Yes. Falling in Love by Donna Leon. The House of Four by Barbara Nadel or Nadell. And The Long Call by Anne Cleves, which was mentioned in last week's show and has been mentioned quite a few times actually recently by us. So yeah, according to the Times, they are the best crime novels by women since the year 2000. Also noticed.
So that's 20 years. My God, that's quite a consider the wealth of. I mean, all of those. I mean, the ones I know just over half of the ones you've read out. Definitely worthy of their place.
Got a child outside my door trying to get in. Hello.
Trying to get in?
Where's Mummy? There we go. This is new for Partners in Crime. There's a child has appeared in the podcast. There we go. Look. Who's this?
Who is that James?
This is James. You okay, mate?
I don't want anything.
You don't want anything?
I think Mummy's been trying to give him a bite to eat. Go to Mummy.
Oh, do you
No!
James, you can't stay in here. We're doing a podcast. You're being broadcast around the world.
Can James wave? Can James wave?
James, wave.
James, can you wave like this?
There we go. That better?
Yes.
You pop in here and I'll come play with you in a minute, I promise. As soon as I finish here, I'll come and play.
Why don't we ring Nanny?
Oh, there's a good idea. Ring Nanny, yes. What we're talking about.
You know, I mean, I look at my kid now. Ben coming up to his 20th birthday. Betsy coming up to her 17th.
Wow.
And May at 14. And they still come into the study and say, not worried about food. Have we got any Arctic rolls? Or it's all based around ice cream when they come into my study.
Yeah.
Well, there we are.
I feel like that Korean expert who was interviewed on the BBC a few years back, and his child walks into the room.
Oh, yes.
I promise you that wasn't set up today by any stretch of the imagination. We were talking before that interruption about female crime writers of this century, and if we go back to the previous century, of course, the number one has to be Agatha Christie. We're celebrating 100 years of her books. The first one, Mysterious Affair at Styles, the first Poirot book, was published 100 years ago, almost exactly. And as part of the celebrations there will be a new Poirot mystery released in August by Sophie Hannah, of course, who's now taken over the series. The Killings at Kingfisher Hill will be her newest offering. In this novel, Poirot is travelling by coach from London to the exclusive Kingfisher Hill estate, where he has been summoned to clear the name of Helen, who has been accused of murdering Frank. A peculiar incident happens during his journey, involving a distressed woman who is convinced she will die if she remains in her seat. Who knows? This might just offer some important clues in his investigation. Now, that's always exciting when you get a new Poirot book, when you get a new Agatha Christie branded book from Sophie Hannah.
And so Sophie does such a brilliant job.
Yeah.
I mean, not all writers who take over sort of established great literary creations manage to pull it off. We've had this conversation on Partners before. I mean, obviously, the ones that stand out are the James Bonds and the Sherlock Holmes and in actual fact the Jeeves and Woosters with Sebastian Faulks does those, and they've all managed to do it very well, and several others who for various reasons and probably nothing to do with their own talent haven't managed to do it quite so well. But Sophie Hannah, I think, has done it brilliantly and goes from strength to strength. I mean, so great.
To the point where this week I've actually read 2 Sophie Hannah books.
Aha.
And the first one was one that you mentioned, I think on last week's show or the week before, which sounded so good I dived into it immediately, which was Haven't They Grown?
They Grown, yes.
Which is an absolutely fantastic book about a woman who sees the children of some old friends of hers that she hasn't seen in many years. They fell out many years earlier, and she sees the woman that she fell out with and her 2 children, except this is 12 years on and the children haven't aged. They're exactly the same age as they were 12 years ago, and a mystery unravels, which is incredible,
great,
to say the least. It is such a good book.
It's incredibly clever. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, I read it all in one day, back to back, and I've not done that in a long time. And the other one of hers that I read this week was, I'm actually about to finish about 92% of the way through, apparently, according to my Kobo device, is Did You See Melody? Have you read this one, book, Bob?
No, I don't know that one.
Well, this is about a woman who she's from England, but she runs away to the United States and stays in a 5-star resort. She's had some problems at home and she just needs to escape. And she checks into a hotel room, but checks into the wrong one and comes across a man and a sort of 13-year-old girl. And it then transpires that this girl is one who was declared dead and murdered many years ago, and her parents are in jail. But it seems that the child is still out there, still alive, and she kind of unravels the mystery of what's going on. So I've really not described it in the best way at all. It's a great book. It's a classic Sophie Hannah, and highly recommended from me. What have you been reading?
Well, now, interestingly enough, I have been... Well, I'll go to that one in a little bit, but I have been reading a Kate Atkinson book, which is a transcription. Now, I have it on Kobo, but I also have it, as it happens, in hardback. So I haven't prepped you for this, so I don't expect you to see it.
That's all right.
Here is a cover.
Oh, there we go. We don't need the cover to come up on the screen if you're watching on the Patreon video, because Bob is holding the book.
Well,
there we go.
We've got a hard book, not an electronic one. It's terrific. I love Kate Atkinson stuff, and of course this is sort of more of a standalone, but it's right up my cup of tea. I'll read you the blurb to give you some idea. In 1940, 18-year-old Juliet Armstrong is reluctantly recruited into the world of espionage, sent to an obscure department of MI5 tasked with monitoring the comings and goings of British fascist sympathisers. She discovers the work to be, by turns, both tedious and terrifying. But after the war has ended, she presumes the events of those years have been relegated to the past forever. 10 years later, now a producer at the BBC, Juliet is unexpectedly confronted by figures from her past. A different war is being fought now on a different battleground. But Juliet finds herself once more under threat. A bill of reckoning is due, and she finally begins to realise that there is no action without consequence. Wise, funny, and paced like a thriller, says The Observer. A spy novel that dismantles the whole genre, Matt Haig. And I would agree with all of these. Well, yeah, I mean, where am I? I'm just over halfway.
You're in your garden,
through.
Bob.
I'm in the garden.
You just had a birthday. It's okay. You're excused.
I am. I don't know what birthday was it. Anyway, it's a smashing book. She writes absolutely wonderfully. And for those of you who are put off by the idea of spies and MI5, who are not drawn to that sort of world, there's a lot in the book that is not necessarily in that vein, and again, it's Kate Atkinson, so it's a terrific read. So that's it. That is one of my first recommendations. Transcription by Kate Atkinson, available electronically.
It is indeed, yes. If you like the sound of any of the books that we've been talking about today, and we'll probably talk about one or two more as well before we go, because it sounds like we've both been having a reading week, then head over to kobo.com. If you've never used Kobo before, you can enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and they'll give you 90% off of your first ebook purchase with them. If you're an existing Kobo customer, then go through the link in the show notes, and if you use the promo code PARTNERS, they will give you 40% off. You don't need an e-reader or anything like that. If you're listening on a mobile phone now or on a tablet, then you can read the books on there as well, and you get quite a lot of money off. So that's always a good thing. Bob, I saw an article in screenrant.com this week, which is about films based on true stories, crime movies based on true stories. This gave me a bit of inspiration, and as a result, I think we should play a bit of a game. What do you think?
Well, yes, he said.
Let's do it. It's a bit of it's a quiz show. It's a quiz show, and I have prepared a little something for it.
Okay, yeah.
Live from a former garage somewhere in Bedfordshire, it's the game show of the century. True Story or Codswallop, with your host, Adam Croft.
Yes, hello and welcome to True Story or Codswallop. So we are playing the game show of the century. Are these films?
About this, by the way.
Yes. Are these films based on true stories, or are they absolute codswallop? That is the question. The first round, your question is the 2014 film A Good Marriage, which was based on the novella of the same name by Stephen King about a wife who discovers her husband is a serial killer. But was it based on a true story, or did Stephen King make up a load of old codswallop?
True.
It is based on a true story. It is inspired by the crimes of Dennis Rader, known as the BTK killer, an American serial killer who killed 10 people between 1974 and 1991, who kept his bloody passion a secret from his family, and his wife was as surprised as everyone else to learn of his crimes. So yeah, that was absolutely based on a true story.
A while back. A long while back.
Yeah. Round two. The 1972 film, based on the Mario Puzo book, The Godfather. We know it's based on a book, but was the book based on true stories or not?
Well, yes, partly it was.
Yes, it was. He took inspiration from New York's Five Families, a collection of 5 organised crime syndicates who joined forces in the years prior to World War II. I'll give you a little hint. These are all actually based on true stories. So I'll probably just run through them now.
Right.
Might be easier.
Thinking I was on a lucky run.
It did mean that I got to spend 3 hours making that nice little theme tune, though. So that was nice.
So I must be the codswallop in this formula. If the rest is all true.
Well,
you're going to let you surprise me.
I didn't say it. The next one was a 2008 film, The Strangers, about a group of masked fiends who break into a suburban home and torment the family that lived there. Director Brian Bertino later clarified the movie was partially inspired by the Manson family murders, but it wasn't the only crime he thought of when he was writing that. Joker from 2019, interestingly, was based on real life crime. The makeup was inspired by a design worn by Pogo, the clown alter ego of serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who murdered 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 78. And the makeup used an unconventional diamond shape around the eyes, which is rarely used today because it's believed to scare children. Natural Born Killers from 1994. That was a big thing at the time. It was very controversial, and people were saying that people were going out and killing people because of seeing this film. But in actual fact, it was a bit of a satire of the 24-hour news stuff and cable TV, which had just come in and was actually glorifying the murders. So it's kind of the other way around, actually. They based that on reality. 2006's The Departed, Martin Scorsese drama about an undercover cop in the Irish mob. Jack Nicholson's character is heavily inspired by the late James Whitey Bulger, who was a prominent figure in the Irish mob and worked as an FBI informant during the 70s and 80s, interestingly. Well, I didn't know. I didn't know any of them, actually. But The Silence of the Lambs was based on true story. Oh, well, there you go. So you knew all these, Bob, didn't you? There we are. I don't know why you bothered playing this game show, quite frankly.
I didn't know The Departed, I must admit, but I somehow I knew the rest. So I'm quite smug. I'm feeling.
Well, there you go. Yes.
Yeah.
It's based on murderer and grave robber. Yeah, based on murderer and grave robber Ed Gein, one of the 20th century's most notorious criminals who used human remains as decorations, which was nice of him. 1990 film I Love You to Death with Tracy Ullman. Her character is inspired by Frances Toto, a Pennsylvania wife who exacted revenge on her unfaithful husband Tony by poisoning him and shooting him in the head. Ultimately, Tony survived and Toto spent 4 years in prison, but upon her release, the couple stayed together and Tony even offered to pay for her bail. Yeah.
You'd think actually after poisoning and being shot in the head, the chances of survival are pretty slim. So
maybe he had an epiphany. Something happened anyway, didn't it? Or maybe that's why he stayed with her, because he got shot in the head and was sufficiently brain damaged to stay with the woman who tried to kill him.
Yes, he could exact personal revenge in the relationship. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that as well. That's a fascinating story of survival, if nothing else.
It is. And 2 more. The Fugitive from 1993, which is inspired by a popular TV show of the same name. Harrison Ford is a widowed man trying to clear his name after his wife's murder. But the plot shares an uncanny resemblance to the story of Sam Shepard, who was tried, convicted, and eventually exonerated for the death of his wife, Marilyn. The case drew national headlines in the States. However, the culprit behind Marilyn's murder was never found, and the case has since gone cold. And I think you'll like the first one, Bob. It's a film from 1931, which was considered by some people to be one of the greatest movies ever made. It was very experimental.
What year is that?
1931.
1931. Let me think. Is it a German film?
Yes.
Does it star Mr. Lom?
Peter Lorre.
Peter Lorre, I mean. Yeah, Peter Lorre.
Yes.
Peter Lorre, yes.
Yes.
I'm pretty close, aren't I?
Yes, you are. It is M. Fritz Lang's M. About a child killer He stalks the streets of pre-World War II Berlin. Interestingly, in preparing for the film, in pre-production, Fritz Lang interviewed Peter Kürten, who is known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, who killed 9 children in Germany between 1913 and 1929. So only within months of them making the film. He was still alive and awaiting execution when M first came out, and he actually was finally executed 2 months after that. So emotions were still raw among audiences when that film came out. Yeah, based on true stories. So
well, it's a very powerful film, and of course, was Peter Lorre's big cinematic break. Peter Lorre. And sort of went straight over to Hollywood to appear in Maltese Falcon and goodness knows how many other sort of films, sort of reprising what he did best, which was deeply sinister, with a layer of vulnerability. That was his.
Deeply sinister with a layer of vulnerability. I like that.
Yes, evil based on a layer of vulnerability. Yeah.
How would you describe your acting style, Bob, if you had to do that?
My acting style, in the words of Noel Coward, it's I accomplish on the whole knowing my lines and not bumping into the furniture. If I can do that, I put that across, be it on camera or on stage, I go home a happy man.
Good. I like it.
Which is the point. Should be the audience. Go home happy people. But there we are. So that was great fun.
Yes. Yeah, well, there we go. Something a little bit different, isn't it, for a Friday morning? It's quite a dark end to a game show, actually.
I think it's a very good thing. We ought to work in it. I know it means a lot of work finding questions answered, but we ought to actually have a section where our listeners and viewers can actually sort of, they can join in all the way through, but it would be interesting to see how they've got on. So if we get a system where we
can have a guest on each week.
And that'd be great.
To play True Story or Codswallop.
How enterprising, Mr. Croft. How very, very enterprising.
Well, there we go. We're expanding out. We're bored on lockdown. We've got to have things to do, and that was one of the things of what we done. So there we are. I am going to go and finish that Sophie Hannah book. Did you see Melody, which is fantastic, and I've got a couple of others I need to crack on with as well, which I'm going to talk about on next week's show. Did you have anything else you needed to talk about, Bob?
Well, I think what I could do actually is I'm going to Arsenic and Old Lace. I'm going to do a bit more on Ragnar Johansson's new book, which I can recommend here. He's just published the third in his trilogy, which is the Hidden Iceland trilogy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that on Arsenic and Old Lace. But for those of you who I mentioned this last week on Arsenic Old Lace, and I'm going to mention it on the main line now. Blood Series 1 I've been watching, and we'll be beginning Series 2 this evening, because I thought Amy and I were just glued to it. A terrific piece made in a co-production between Channel 5 and Virgin, and it's very, very good indeed. I mentioned it last week, but I'll just do a quick recap now for those who would like to start. Series 1, you can get it on Catch Up, and Series 2 was out on Channel 5 last week, but you can get that on Catch Up too, and I strongly recommend you start with Series 1. Kat Hogan, played brilliantly by the actress Carolina Main, returns home to Westmeath in rural Ireland following the news that her mother, who had been suffering from a long illness, has died after falling over and striking her head against a rock at the family home. Haunted by flashbacks from an incident in her childhood, she's convinced her father had something to do with her mother's death, and her family is torn by suspicion and grief. Was her mother's death an accident? They've got this wrong, actually. This is Wikipedia. She didn't hit her head against a rock. She hit her head against a frog. We're going to listen. We're going to watch
frog?
It. That will become clear if you sit down and watch. But a fantastic cast headed by Adrian Dunbar, who's absolutely brilliant in everything he does, and a host of top flight Irish actors, and it really is. It's twists and turns. You don't know where it is. Like, it's very well done. So I'm going to be starting watching series 2 this evening, which I can't wait for. But if you're new to it, catch up on the series Blood, Channel 5 on version. I'm not quite sure what platform it plays across the world, but it's a title that you'll recognise straight away. And if you're looking and a big fan of Adrian Dunbar, I'm sure you'll be tuning in anyway. Fantastic production values, fantastic story, wonderfully written and made. So there we are.
You're quite fortunate, because last week when you mentioned Adrian Dunbar, I set off the name drop alert ticker at the bottom of the screen.
Yes, you did.
And I've actually produced a new name drop alert video.
So that means I've got a name now.
Well, no, yeah. If you're talking about the fact that you knew him, you came close. But if you'd mentioned perhaps on it what a wonderful chap he was and how you'd worked with him on so and such a thing, I would have fired off the name drop alert. But you've just about escaped it this week, Mr. Daws.
Oh, that's good. You're going to save that for another week.
I'll save that one for another week. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would. I mean, show some restraint, and then I won't talk about that 3 months filming with Daniel Craig then, because that would be terrible.
Name drop alert. Name drop alert. Name drop alert. Name drop alert.
So there we go.
Thought I'd do it over the top of you talking. Why not? If you may have watched that on the video. If you are one of our patrons, you can watch episodes of Partners in Crime rather than just listen to it. You get lots of other things as well, including, if I can find it because I've gone and lost it. Including forthwith, you get access to Arsenic and Old Lace, the after show, which we'll be recording shortly. It's basically more Partners in Crime every week, and you get a free book every month courtesy of Kobo. The free book of the month this month is not just one book, but 3. It's normally £6.99, and you can get it absolutely free with your Patreon subscription, which is only a couple of quid. So it's a fantastic way to just get some heavily discounted books. They're technically free. This month, May's book of the month is the Anna Burgin gripping mystery thriller series by David Bradwell. You get the first 3 books in that series. The first book is Cold Press, set in 1993, where the hunters become the hunted in a deadly game of pursuit. Book 2 is Out of the Red, set in 1994. Can Danny and Anna dig up the truth before one shot becomes a fatal overexposure? And book 3 is Fade to Silence, set a year later in 1995, when being hunted by a Serbian hitman is the least of your worries, according to the description there. So you can get all 3 of those books in one massive box set, completely free, as a Partners in Crime patron. If you're an existing patron, just log into your Patreon dashboard and you'll be able to see the link there to the book and your exclusive promo code available only to patrons. If you're not already a patron and you do want to join, then check out the link in the show notes. You can head over there and check out all the stuff that you get access to and all the fantastic benefits and features of being a very valued supporter of Partners in Crime, or head over to patreon.com/Partners in Crime podcast. I think
very good. That sounds absolutely terrific. I love that bit about the Serbian hitman. I mean, what do you say? Least of your worries. Yeah, I'm being tracked down by a Serbian hitman, but damn, I've got to finish this VAT first.
Yeah, there we go.
Everyone's got problems.
We have, yes. It's all a matter of comparison and scale, and how things affect you personally, deeply on the inside, isn't it? No. On that note, we'll disappear. We'll go and record Partners in Crime, Arsenic and Old Lace for our patrons, and for everybody else, we will see you back here, same time, roughly next week.
Ta-ra!
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Daws and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beish. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.